Go.
Well, there's been so much said about Julia Gillard, Wayne Swan, the Labor Party, the budget and the polls. Gary Johns is a former Labor member of the Federal Parliament. He was elected to the seat of Petrie in Queensland in 1987. He's an economist with a master's degree from Monash University. He was the Assistant Minister for Industrial Relations in the Hawke government, the Special Minister for State in the Hawke government, and the Vice President of the Executive Council in the Hawke-Keating governments. He's written a scarifying commentary on the Gillard government. He argues that when July 1 ticks over and the Greens have the balance of power in the Senate, merry hell, his words, will break loose. He refers to Senator Bob Brown as the real Deputy Prime Minister who'll want, says Gary Johns, a tax of $200 a tonne on carbon dioxide emissions. And then he says in the most sarcastic way, and I quote, "Surely in her travels the Prime Minister must have heard of the massive demand for our coal, gas and iron ore. Perhaps the Prime Minister thinks that a carbon tax will knock it down to manageable proportions." Now there's a strategy. He goes on, "It may be hard to suggest that the Treasurer's fourth and the Prime Minister's first and surely final budget was tardy. Goodness knows they had a lot on their mind. It's a real credit they managed to hide the carbon tax and delay the tax summit." Unquote. Well, the Prime Minister was always saying that in government you don't have the luxury of simply opposing everything, as we see from the opposition. Well, Gary Johns writes, quote, "Opposing bad policy is a good thing. Only a government that thinks it has all the solutions and the people none would suggest that an opposition that wants to stop things is negative." Writes Gary Johns, "Stopping the carbon tax, stopping the boats, stopping the national broadband network, stopping the waste is positive. Stopping government mess is a positive act." Gary Johns writes, remember this is a former Labor Minister in the Hawke government. The coalition wants government to get out of the way. Labor wants it to rule our lives. He calls the Gillard government a classic third generation government. Gary Johns explains, I quote, "First generation modern Labor, Gough Whitlam, knew where he was headed, he had an ideal and did some good work on the social side, even if he didn't understand economics. Second generation Labor, Hawke-Keating, understood the economics." And then writes Gary Johns, "But this lot, this third generation knows nothing of the vision of Gough and nothing of the economics of Hawke and Keating. The third generation Labor government is a spoilt kid who just wants to spend the money and having spent it, wants to ask for more. More taxes," writes Gary Johns. "Some vision." He quotes the Prime Minister when she said, quote, "As a government we're proud that under our economic stewardship 750,000 jobs have been created and we look forward to seeing another 500,000 jobs created," unquote. Writes Gary Johns, "This is a fraud. The measure is how many should have been created in that period and at what cost to the taxpayer." He says the opposition can create jobs by burning down houses and rebuilding them. We too can spend money on building solar panels and windmills at many times cost. Gary Johns says, as if he were prosecuting the government in the Parliament, "Mr. Speaker, I make this solemn promise to Australia. I cannot solve all of your problems, but I'll not waste your money trying." When the government starts being cleaned out by those from amongst its own ranks, it's surely time to let the people decide.